finishing up this problem from yesterday, we were trying to factor the numerator. We know that we have to be able to cancel an x minus 1, right, top and bottom. So that has to be a factor of the top. We could just brute force factor the numerator. It's fine, not a big deal. We know it has to work. Whoops, let's remind ourselves, limits approaching 1 there. But the other thing we could do is we could use synthetic division, right? We know that, here, I'll come down to the bottom of the page. We know a couple things. We know that if x minus 1 is a factor of the numerator, then 1 is a 0 of the numerator, right? So we could use synthetic division, set up a synthetic division bracket, and we're going to input the 0, 1. There's the x value we're going to divide through. And how many terms do we got? 3. Okay. So it was 9x squared minus 2x minus 11. And we know that because this is a 0, we have to have a 0 in the remainder box. So we'll just crank this thing through synthetically, and what do we get as a result? I bring the 9 down. 1 times 9 is 9, plus negative 2 is 7. Oh, what happened? Plus 2x. What happened here? 25. Minus 11. Oh, it's a plus 2x. No wonder. Huh. Okay. Couldn't figure out what was happening. So that's a plus sign, which makes that, knew it had to work, which makes this an 11. 1 times 11 is 11, and sure enough, when I add those up, I get 0. So what's that tell me then? That tells me that my other factor is 9x plus 11, right? From going back to our knowledge of how to use synthetic division. So 9x plus 11 is the other factor. That's what's going to go there, right? And again, we could have just factored that. It would have been fine. Divided by, on the bottom, we've got our x minus 1 times the quantity square root of 9x squared plus 2x plus 14 plus 5 as x approaches 1. Sure enough, as predicted, the x minus 1s cancel. And now we can evaluate what we're left with. If I evaluate that limit as x approaches 1, I get the answer. On the top, 20, right? 9 times 1 plus 11 is 20. On the bottom, we get the square root of 9 plus 2 is 11 plus 14 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5, plus another 5 is 10. And so we get 2, right? So then going back to our original problem, we were trying to figure out where the vertical asymptotes and holes were of this function that we started with. And so because when we removed the indeterminacy, we got an answer. We got a numerical answer for our limit. So now we know there is a hole at the ordered pair. Let's see, x was approaching 1. And the value of the limit was 2. So we had a hole at the point 1, 2. All right. So we've encountered vertical asymptotes when we evaluate limits and end up with the result, a number divided by 0. How could we locate a function's horizontal asymptotes? Because that's our next goal, right? We just dealt with vertical asymptotes. How are we going to find horizontal asymptotes? That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, is how we do this. Before we jump into that, there are some key differences between horizontal asymptotes and vertical asymptotes. So you cannot cross a vertical asymptote. When we get into the part of the class where we look at some functional analysis, we're going to take a function and I'm going to show you guys how to build, and this is really cool. And this is kind of my own deal. I'm very proud of this. Show you guys how to build a little table that will allow you to really quickly analyze the function for all of its important characteristics, minima and maxima, points of inflection, asymptotes, symmetry, all that stuff. We're going to find that when we have vertical asymptotes, it's like creating separate little parts of the domain that almost act like their own little universes, right? An ant walking along the function can never cross that vertical asymptote. So the ant is going to be partitioned into either the part to the left of a vertical asymptote or the part to the right. They can never cross it, right? So you can't ever cross a vertical asymptote. You can cross a horizontal asymptote. It's no big deal. Horizontal asymptotes work very differently. Here's an example. So the definition of a horizontal asymptote is going to be the horizontal line y equals L if one of these two things or both of these two things happen at the same time. The limit of f of x as x approaches negative infinity is L, or the limit of f of x as x approaches positive infinity equals L. So the concept here is if we want to find horizontal asymptotes, we have to explore the behavior of the function way out at its infinite tails, way out infinitely far to the right or infinitely far to the left. If the behavior becomes consistent and the behavior of the function is that it more and more closely approaches a specific y value, the further I go to the left, to the right, or the left, then that constitutes a horizontal asymptote. What is a horizontal asymptote? It's just a line that the function tends to stick to as you get closer and closer to infinity or negative infinity. For a vertical asymptote, what did that mean? If we go back for a second and look at our graph that we built here, what was that vertical asymptote? It just meant as the ant approached the value of 2 from the left, what happened? The behavior of the function was such that it more and more closely stuck to that vertical line. It never gets to it, but more and more closely it mirrors that line the closer we get to 2 from the left or the right. Anybody see that? Yep. There is. Yeah, there is a horizontal asymptote here at 0. You're right. If we were to go further out there, yeah. Mhm. No, in this case it wouldn't. You're right. But in many cases it can. So this is our definition of a horizontal asymptote. Let's look at an example. What if we take the function f of x equals sine x over x? If I graph that function, and we'll explore functions like this tomorrow in more detail, or maybe the day after. Look what happens. This function crosses through the x-axis an infinite number of times, right? But wouldn't you agree that the wave train is getting damped to the right and the left the further I go in those directions? The oscillations are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And if I were to go way out there, what you'd find is that trend continues. And so even though the function is oscillating around a whole bunch and passing through the x-axis an infinite number of times, the trend is that it's always getting closer and closer and closer to the x-axis, right? And so even in this weird case, we would say, yeah, there is a horizontal asymptote that guides the behavior of the function. Infinitely far to the right, which we can never get to, we should expect that if we go infinitely far, we're going to end up at the x-axis. Now that's a weird concept. We say if we, at infinity, we say this all the time in physics too. At infinity, the y value would be 0. Okay, well, can you get to infinity? No, but you see the idea, right? It's illustrating the trend that we always, this continuous trend that we have as we move further and further to the right or the left. Okay? So give me 1 to 5. Do you get you just understand what we mean in this case, how we could say that this function has a horizontal asymptote. Does that part all make sense? Okay, questions. If you can ask a clarifying question, that would be great. Yes, sir.
This is just another question, but are vertical asymptotes like used in like physics?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like if you, an example would be all the time. Like if you were going to, well, the fundamental problem with modern physics is that we can't reconcile general relativity, which is Einstein's baby. That's our understanding of gravity, which is that massive objects warp the space-time continuum, and that's what causes gravity, right? With quantum mechanics, you can get down to these infinitely small scales. If you were to go down to an infinitely small distance in general relativity, you would end up with this infinite density in a black hole, for example, or at the beginning of the universe in the Big Bang, you'd end up with an infinite density, and you can't have infinities in nature. It's impossible. And so, yeah, you get this. If you look at this from a general relativistic perspective, you get a vertical asymptote when you shrink an object down into a black hole, when its size becomes infinitely small, but its mass remains finite. You get these. That is an example of a vertical asymptote. Yeah. So you do see them. Yes. Any other clarifying questions on that? Okay. So then what's helpful to do here, okay, one other thing. So limits at infinity. I'll throw out this theorem. If r is a positive rational number, and by the way, we can show that this works. I probably won't do this proof just because we don't have time to do it, but we could show that this works if r is any positive real number. Doesn't even have to be a rational number. We could prove that it works for all real numbers, even irrational numbers. Then the limit of some constant divided by x to the r as x approaches infinity is 0. Okay? And the limit of c divided by x to the r as x approaches negative infinity is also 0. Okay, why is that? Think about it this way. Think about the behavior of a function, right? What's a bigger fraction? When I said function, I meant fraction. Think about the behavior of fractions. What's a bigger fraction? 1/10 or 1/100th? 1/10, right? If the top of a fraction stays finite and the bottom of a fraction increases, isn't that driving the value of the fraction smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So in a case like this, then, if we're taking a limit where the top is staying constant and on the bottom I've got x to the r where x is approaching infinity, isn't the bottom of the fraction going to be carried to infinity then? What's the logical limit of that? If the top is staying at some constant value and the bottom is approaching infinity, what value is the fraction itself approaching? It's got to be 0, doesn't it? Right? So you can pretty easily reconcile that if you think about it. You wouldn't. R could be 1. Right. But this is saying you can even be more general than that. You can say we can make the more general, the better the theorem, right? So for example, if we took the limit of this function as x approached infinity, what's the answer going to be? It's going to be 5, isn't it, right? As x approaches infinity, isn't this term right here going to approach 0? I'm going to end up with 3 over an infinitely large number, which is 0, effectively 0, right? So we get the answer 5. So this doesn't seem like much, but this is the theorem that we're going to appeal to tomorrow when we prove a bunch of different shortcuts for evaluating limits of rational functions. It's no big deal. You'll see that tomorrow. You guys will come up with the proofs yourself. I'll just write them down, and we'll be able to look at any rational function, and by inspection, without even doing any, at the end of the day tomorrow, without even doing any algebra, you guys will be able to tell me, okay, the limit of that one is 0. The limit of that one doesn't have a limit, does not exist. The limit of that one is this number. And there's 3 possibilities. You'll all be able to pick that out tomorrow. Okay, to get there though, I want to take you on a little tour of a function, and I want to point out a really important concept. And this is all I'm going to do today. So let's look at this function. Here's my function. It's this polynomial. It's got some coefficient of x to the 4th plus some coefficient of x cubed plus some coefficient of x squared plus x. Okay, and we're going to look at this thing on different scales. Well, right now, which of those 4 terms appears to dominate the behavior of that function? The linear, the quadratic, the cubic, or the quartic? Everybody agree the linear one does? If I superimpose our polynomial with the graph of y equals x, well, they line right up, don't they? So it would appear on this scale, if we were going to employ inductive thinking reasoning instead of deductive reasoning, we would say, okay, well then clearly the dominant term in that polynomial must be the linear one, but it's not. I mean, if I zoom out a little bit, pretty quickly we can see that things change in a way that makes it nonlinear. Okay, now it's nonlinear. Right? If I compare that to a quadratic function, they seem similar, right? So we might say, okay, well, it's the quadratic term that dominates. Of course, if I go out a little further, I see that no, that's not the case. It's not the quadratic term. It seems to be the cubic term. It matches most closely. And obviously, if I go out even further, there's going to be a point where all those other terms are not going to matter, and only the quartic term is going to be the dominant term, right? And if I go out far enough, I got to go ways, but if I go out far enough, and I just need to tweak this a little bit. Let's see, what if we let x-axis go from okay, let's just try zooming out from there. Oh, by the way, so I'm only graphing the blue function, the polynomial. Got to go out a ways, quite a ways. Maybe I was a little too aggressive with that, but okay, there we go. Now, do you even see, that looks pretty quartic, doesn't it? If I look at that compared to a quartic function, they almost line up perfectly. Do you see any linear nature to that, or quadratic or cubic? You don't at all. The point is that if our input values are big enough and we're dealing with a polynomial, all of the terms other than the leading term, the dominant term, become utterly insignificant. And if we're going to take the limit as we approach infinity or negative infinity, all we have to consider is that leading term. Everything else just is background noise. Okay? All right. See you tomorrow.